Book 3, Part 1 of Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Morgan Scorpion. Metamorphoses by Publius Ovidius Naso. Translated by Brooks Moore. Book 3, Part 1. Now Jupiter had not revealed himself, nor laid aside the semblance of a bull, until they stood upon the plains of Crete. But, not aware of this, her father bade her brother Cadmus search through all the world, until he found his sister, and proclaimed him doomed to exile if he found her not. Thus was he good and wicked in one deed. When he had vainly wandered over the earth, for who can fathom the deceits of Jove, Cadmus, the son of Agenor, shunned his country and his father's mighty wrath. But he consulted the famed oracle of Phoebus, and inquired of them what land might offer him a refuge and a home. And Phoebus answered him, When on the plains a heifer that has never known the yoke shall cross thy path, go thou with her, and follow where she leads, and when she lies to rest herself upon the meadow green, there shalt thou stop, as it will be a sign for thee to build upon that plain the wells of a great city, and its name shall be the city of Boeotia. Cadmus turned, but hardly had descended from the cave Castalion, ere he saw a heifer go unguarded, gentle-paced, without the scars of labour on her neck. He followed close upon her steps, and silently adored celestial Phoebus, author of his way, till over the channel that Cephissus wears he forded to the fields of Panope, and even over to Boeotia. There stood the slow-paced heifer, and she raised her forehead, broad with shapely horns, towards heaven, and as she filled the air with lowing, stretched her side upon the tender grass, and turned her gaze on him who followed in her path. Cadmus gave thanks and kissed the foreign soil, and offered salutation to the fields and unexplored hills. Then he prepared to make large sacrifice to Jupiter, and ordered slaves to seek the living springs whose waters in libation might be poured. There was an ancient grove, whose branching trees had never known the desecrating axe, where, hidden in the undergrowth, a cave, with osiers bending round its low-formed arch, was hollowed in the jutting rocks. Deep found in the dark centre of that hallowed grove, beneath its arched roof a beauteous stream of water welled serene. Its gloom concealed a dragon, sacred to the warlike Mars, crested and gorgeous with iridescent scales, and eyes that sparkled as the glow of coals. A deadly venom had puffed up his bulk, and from his jaws he darted forth 3 tongues, and in a triple row his sharp teeth stood. Now those who ventured of the Tyrian race, misfortuned followers of Cadmus, took the path that led them to this grove, and when they cast down splashing in the springs an urn, the hidden dragon stretched his azure head out from the cavern's gloom and vented forth terrific hissings. Horrified they dropped their urns. A sudden trembling shook their knees, and their life-blood was ice within their veins. The dragon wreathed his scales in rolling knots, and with a spring, entwisted in great folds, reared up his bulk beyond the middle rings, high in the air from whence was given his gaze the extreme confines of the grove below. A size prodigious, his enormous bulk, if seen extended where was naught to hide, would rival in its length the serpent's folds, involved betwixt the plains of the twin bears. The terrified Phoenicians, whether armed for conflict, or in flight precipitate, or whether held incapable from fear, he seized with sudden rage, stung them to death, or crushed them in the grasp of crushing folds, or blasted with the poison of his breath. High in the heavens the sun small shadow made, when Cadmus, wondering what detained his men, prepared to follow them. Clothed in a skin torn from a lion, he was armed, complete, with lance of glittering steel, and with a dart, but passing these he had a dauntless soul. When he explored the grove and there beheld the lifeless bodies, and above them stretched the vast victorious dragon, licking up the blood that issued from their ghastly wounds, his red tongues dripping gore, then Cadmus, filled with rage and grief, "Behold, my faithful ones, I will avenge your deaths, or I will share it." He spoke, and lifted up a millstone huge in his right hand, and having poised it, hurled with a tremendous effort, dealing such a blow would crush the strongest builded walls. Yet neither did the dragon flinch the shock, nor was he wounded, for his armour scales, fixed in his hard and swarthy hide, repelled the dreadful impact. Not the javelin thus, so surely by his armoured skin was foiled, for through the middle segment of his spine the steel point pierced, and sank beneath the flesh, deep in his entrails. Writhing in great pain, he turned his head upon its bleeding back, twisting the shaft with force prodigious, shook it back and forth, and wrenched it from the wound, with difficulty wrenched it, but the steel remained securely fastened in his bones. Such agony but made increase of rage. His throat was swollen with great knotted veins, a white froth gathered on his poisonous jaws, the earth resounded with his rasping scales. He breathed upon the grass a pestilence, steaming mephitic from his Stygian mouth. His body writhes up in tremendous gyres, his folds, now straighter than a beam, untwist. He rushes forward on his vengeful foe, his great breast crushing the deep-rooted trees. Small space gave Cadmus to the dragon's rage, for by the lion's spoil he stood the shock, and thrusting in his adversary's jaws the trusted lance, gave check his mad career. Wild in his rage, the dragon bit the steel, and fixed his teeth on the keen biting point. Out from his poisoned palate streams of gore spouted and stained the green with sanguine spray. Yet slight the wound, for he recoiled in time, and drew his wounded body from the spear, by shrinking from the sharp steel saved his throat a mortal wound. But Cadmus, as he pressed the spear point deeper in the serpent's throat, pursued him till an oak tree barred the way. To this he fixed the dragon through the neck, the stout trunk bending with the monster's weight, groaned at the lashing of his serpent tail. While the brave victor gazed upon the bulk enormous of his vanquished foe, a voice was heard, from whence was difficult to know, but surely heard. Son of Agenor, why art thou here standing by this carcass-worm? For others shall behold thy body changed into a serpent. Terrified, amazed, he lost his colour and his self-control. His hair stood upright from the dreadful fright. But lo, the hero's watchful deity, Minerva from the upper realms of air, appeared before him. She commanded him to sow the dragon's teeth in mellowed soil, from which might spring another race of men. And he obeyed, and as he ploughed the land, took care to scatter in the furrowed soil the dragon's teeth, a seed to raise up man. 'Tis marvellous but true, when this was done the clods began to move. A spear point first appeared above the furrows, followed next by helmet-covered heads, nodding their cones, their shoulders, breasts, and arms weighted with spears, and largely grew the shielded crop of men. So it is in the joyful theatres when the gay curtains, rolling from the floor, are upward drawn until the scene is shown. It seems as if the figures rise to view. First we behold their faces, then we see their bodies, and their forms by slow degrees appear before us on the painted cloth. Cadmus, affrighted by this host, prepared to arm for his defence, but one of those from earth crested cried, "Arm not, away from civil wars," and with his trenchant sword he smote an earth-born brother, hand to hand, even as the vanquished so the victor fell, pierced by a dart some distant brother hurled, and likewise he who cast that dart was slain, both breathing forth their lives upon the air so briefly theirs, expired together. All as if demented leaped in sudden rage, each on the other, dealing mutual wounds. So, having lived the space allotted them, the youthful warriors perished as they smote the earth, their blood-stained mother, with their breasts, and only 5 of all the troop remained, of whom Echion, by Minerva warned, called on his brothers to give up the fight, and cast his arms away in pledge of faith. When Cadmus, exiled from Sidonia's gates, builded the city by Apollo named, these 5 were trusted comrades in his toil. Now Thebes is founded, who can deem thy days unhappy in thine exile, Cadmus? Thou, the son-in-law of Mars and Venus, thou, whose glorious wife has borne to thine embrace daughters and sons, and thy grandchildren join around thee, almost grown to man's estate, nor should we say, he leads a happy life, till after death the funeral rites are paid. Thy grandson, Cadmus, was the first to cast thy dear felicity in sorrow's gloom. Oh, it was pitiful to witness him, his horns outbranching from his forehead, chased by dogs that panted for their master's blood. If thou shouldst well inquire, it will be shown his sorrow was the crime of fortune,